for joining us on this occasion of opening Andrea Carlson's Shimmer on Horizons. We are indeed in the midst of a truly amazing artist, Andrea Carlson. And so on behalf of the museum and the board and our community, I want to thank Andrea and her collaborator for the video work that you'll see in this show, Rosalinda Borsia, for being with us and for sharing their work and vision tonight. I want to also acknowledge that the vision of tonight's Henri artist has been fully brought to realization by the incredible curatorial work of Iris Colburn visiting here from the MCA Chicago, where the exhibition was first presented. So Iris, thank you for entrusting us to carry this exhibition forward. And thank you also to Jessica Hong for coordinating and bringing forth this incredibly sensitive and beautiful installation for our audiences in Kansas City. You're a champ. I want to thank so many of you in the audience tonight who are members of this museum for your year-over-year support. It takes a lot to run a museum that's free to the public. I think we all know that. And some of you say, I'm going to give you a kind of investment year over year so that you can keep doing your work, you can keep dreaming big, you can keep finding ways to create impact and benefit in our entire community and support our creative community as well. So I do want to thank you so much for your member support year over year. If you're not a member, boy, do we have an opportunity for you. I'm going to be your salesperson tonight. This exhibition has been broadly and specifically supported first by the museum's Board of Trustees. And I also want to thank the Kemper Family Foundations and the Muriel McBrien Kaufman Foundation for their support of this exhibition, as well as the Missouri Arts Council, which is a part of the National Endowment for the Arts. And may I say, long live the NEA, here and everywhere in this country. I want to thank the gallerists also who do the crucial work year over year of keeping artists' work in the public sphere. It sometimes takes a long time for an artist to get an institutional exhibition, and gallerists are there to help nurture them, push them along, and make sure that all of us get to see their work. So this evening, we welcome Todd Bockley and Emily Marsalek of Bockley Gallery, as well as Catherine Raid of Jessica Silverman Gallery. I want to thank you for making the trek here. Now, it's my job to get off the stage and welcome Jessica Hong to the podium and to launch us into our evening. Thank you all so much.
All right, thank you, everybody. Oh my gosh, it's so nice to see so much of you. And there's a couple seats up front, so you're welcome for the brave folks who want to sit up front. And we should have some stools coming as well. But as a brief intro, my name is Jessica Hong. I am the chief curator here at the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art. I just started after this new year. I'm really delighted to be here and to see you all. Of course, you know, I'll be welcoming our esteemed guests shortly, but especially on this occasion, it is important to acknowledge the Kemper Museum of Contemporary Art resides on the ancestral territory of the Osage, Kaw, and Otoe, Missouri, among other tribal nations forcibly moved from the regions such as the Shawnee, Wyandot, Delaware, Potawatomi, Sac, and Fox, and Kickapoo nations. We recognize and support the continued vibrancy of Native communities and cultures today who continue to thrive, as well as the inherent sovereignty of tribal nations. We are compelled to serve and advocate for these communities in accordance with our public mission. Kemper Museum acknowledges and respects the diversity of Native people connected to these lands today. Many recognize the land and all beings who live within it as relatives. We acknowledge the earth we inhabit, the waters of the Blue River, the Kansas River, the Missouri River, and the plants, animals, and people supported by them. We acknowledge our responsibility to the good caretakers of the land we occupy. And as with Andrea Carlson's work, this land acknowledgement reminds us of our shared responsibility to actively care for these lands and all that it holds today for one another. And actually, several years ago, members of our community worked with the Kemper Museum to shape this acknowledgement, some of whom I believe are here tonight. So we give thanks to Galen Krauser of the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Executive Director of the Kansas City Indian Center, Jimmy Lee Beeson II of the Osage Nation, author and professor of Indigenous and American Indian Studies at Haskell Indian Nations University, Dr. Daniel Wildcat of the Uchee Creek, and author and professor of Indigenous and American Indian Studies at Haskell, Mona Cliff of the A'aninin Nakota Nations, and the award-winning artist, And everything we do is a collective effort, including exhibitions, and that labor, and it truly is labor, is often invisible to the public. So thank you to our incredible, hardworking team who brought this project to life. Sam Maloney, exhibitions manager, who's here with her family. Woo! Will Preeman, preparator, contract registrar Anna Siminovich, our on-call prep team, Benjamin Clements, Clark Henry, Emily McGowan, Emmett Merrill, Logan Reynolds, Jack Ruport, as well as our facilities and operations team. And as Jessica May mentioned, a special thanks to Iris Colburn, Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago curator who organized this exhibition in Chicago and collaborated with us to bring it to KC. And Andrea's work, as Jessica May also mentioned, is deeply collaborative. And we're delighted to have Rosalinda Borsilla, artist and activist, here tonight. And she worked with Andrea on the video work in the show, and they also co-authored a powerful accompanying text, which you're welcome to take a copy from the gallery. The video explores Chicago's wetlands and the fraught practice of wetland banking. So in response, we're celebrating our local ecosystems and Indigenous stewardship in our own region. So we're grateful to our community partner, Courtney King of the Peoria, and the greenhouse manager at Haskell. So she'll be leading a program with us on Thursday, September 11th, highlighting her work with the Haskell wetlands. So please mark your calendars for that. And finally, our deepest gratitude to Andrea Carlson. Through her visually striking and incisive practice, she compels us to consider the significance of place, especially urgent today as lands continue to be taken, histories erased from public records, and stories silenced. Across our field, friends, colleagues, and arts practitioners are facing unprecedented levels of scrutiny in how we engage with the past, how we share stories and ideas, even how we write labels. Frankly, pressures that few of us could have imagined in 2025. So when reciprocal conversations feel impossible, it's artists who bravely make space for us to connect. Art allows us to convene, reflect, and engage, and museums must remain places for that, particularly when it's hard, because that's especially when it's necessary. So thank you all for being here, for showing up with care and intention. Your presence and support give us strength to continue this critical work. And thank you, Andrea, for your generous and vital work. So Andrea is going to share a bit about her practice, and we should have some time at the end for some questions. But a quick bio before bringing her up on stage. Andrea Carlson maintains a studio practice in northern Minnesota and Chicago. She primarily creates painted and drawn works on paper, addressing land and institutional spaces, decolonization narratives, and assimilation metaphors in film. Her work is in public collections, including the Whitney Museum of American Art, MCA Chicago, Denver Art Museum, Minneapolis Institute of Art, National Gallery of Canada, just to name a few. Carlson was a recipient of a McKnight Fellowship, Joan Mitchell Foundation Painters and Sculptors Award, Artadia Award, and the United States Artist Fellowship. And everyone should go out to Denver this fall, as Andrea has her first major museum survey at the Denver Art Museum, Andrea Carlson, A Constant Sky, opening October 5th. She is also the co-founder of Center for Native Futures in Chicago. So please help me welcoming Andrea Carlson.
Wow. Buju Nindanawe Maganidak, Andrea Carlson, Indigenous, Mikanak Nindodame, Gichi Bitubig, Ninda Nungum, Mikwech, Bizendawieg, Nimenoya Apachi, Gaye Niminwendam Ewan, Aoma Nungum. Thank you for that. I just said a little bit in Ojibwe to totally authenticate myself. I am Turtle Clan. I am Grand Portage Ojibwe. I live in Grand Marais, Minnesota currently, and I'm very happy to be here. I'm very happy to share this space with you and to talk about my art. I wanted to start with where I'm from. This is off of a little cliff on my grandmother's land up in Grand Marais, Minnesota, and it's Lake Superior. It's 10% of the world's fresh water in one lake. Once you are familiar with any landscape, if you live in the Midwest with flat prairies, or if you're on Lake Superior, or if you're on an ocean, you start like making the world organized around these environments. If you are near a lake or a mountain range, those places have moods. They have energy. You turn away, you can kind of feel where the lake is. You can kind of feel where mountains are. You can feel where valleys or rivers or streams are. I think that it's built into our bodies when you're really familiar with a place. And this is the place that's baked into my body. Quite literally, because I drink water from that lake as well. So I wanted to give some kind of background on my career, just bring you into early work, bring you on a little bit of a timeline, and then jump around a bunch to really hone in on some of the work that's in this show. I did this piece. It was my first piece I did in grad school back in 2004. I think I finished it a little bit later. What I was doing really early on was learned my language in undergrad at the University of Minnesota. I learned a lot of Atsokanag, these sacred stories, and we can only tell those stories when there's snow on the ground. I was thinking of how they're performed, but then wanting to put the various characters within a painting, which makes that performance static. So throughout the rest of my body of work, I've been playing with this idea of time and space and stasis, and kind of pushing and pulling on those parameters. This is also a work, where it's taken from a story, but there's like this splitting apart, this double portraiture that comes up again and again. I was also very curious about how objects hold identity, how you might look at something and be like, oh, that's a German Stein, or that's something that might read as feminine or masculine, or how we assign identity to objects, the story that goes onto an object. And as an object maker, as a painter, what identity was I imbuing into objects? So I got my first museum show with artist Jim Denemy at the Minneapolis Institute of Arts back in 2008 around. And I had been thinking of objects and identity and didn't know what to put in that show, didn't know what to make. And so it kind of dawned on me very late that a museum is full of objects that have stories, that have different ways that they became part of the collection. So this piece, it has a plate at the center, and it depicts Fort Snelling in Minnesota. And if you know about the story behind Fort Snelling, it was a concentration camp for Dakota Native folks. And this plate was manufactured in Hamburg, Germany. So I also think of like the myth making around objects and who's telling whose story. I was also kind of fascinated with this idea of getting into a landscape, these mythical landscapes, and then being able to get into a secondary landscape within the object and what it was depicting. So I'm starting to think of land and violence too. There's fighters in the background of this piece and wolves waiting to devour the body. So I was thinking of violence and land. This is another piece from that show. It's entitled New Skins. So you can still see some of the kind of cartoonish elements that's coming from the stories, the Atsokanag, and then objects from the museum's collection. I thought this one looked a little phallic, but it's a French astrological clock. This is a holy water stoop, where you would put your hands in the holy water. Then I decided, I got the McKnight Award, and I really wanted to, the work that I was making, the previous paintings I was showing you are about 22.5 by 30 inches large, and I I was thinking of them as being almost possessible, like someone could hold them and carry them off, but that relationship you have to something that's smaller, you feel a possession or a care over it. Something that's larger than you, though, you become its possession. You become part of its environment. It could overtake you. So I wanted to make something that was less of a window and more of a door, more of a portal. These pieces, the Tempest and Portage, are kind of sister pieces. You can kind of look past this pattern and see a landscape, but that landscape is, it might feel like a decolonized space. You don't see any cabins, you don't see any people in those environments. And so I was thinking of these as ways of thinking of decolonization. Like, we can think in our minds what decolonization might look like. It might be unpeopled, like no development or sidewalks. We could imagine decolonization as looking like that. That's not how I imagine it. But as landscapes go, this is a space you can't access. You can't get there from here. It's a painting on paper. You can hold it in your mind and you can imagine that space, and we can all imagine that space, but we can't actually enter it. It's a painting. So I was thinking about decolonization being that way too. Can we get there from here? Can we actually get there from here? And maybe we can't, but we can imagine a thing and move towards. So I was thinking about it, how a painting would function like that. Here's the scale, so it is kind of a door. You can kind of see a person looking at it. And this is where things get a little weird. I did a series of works that were referencing Italian horror films, taking the taglines from them, and it's my Vor series. So these movies were pretty much the same movie. They were all like a oil prospector, a colonizer, a cult, or a missionary, some menacing element would go into an indigenous place with indigenous people, do some really heinous, horrible thing to the indigenous people, and then the finale of all these films are revenge films, so then the indigenous people kill and eat the settlers. So, but they were not made by Native people, even though it's kind of, I don't know, I'm very intrigued by them. So I made these like fake movie posters that have nothing to do, it's like clearly the person who has not seen the film, but I was using the language and taglines from movies like Cannibal Ferox and This is Cannibal Holocaust. And then I was also starting to get very interested in how animals, how we see them as almost stripped down symbols for like predator or prey. Long Weekend references both the film Long Weekend and Weekend. You can see the landscape. One of the things I did as a kind of a topological reference is the horizon lines in all of these works, this is Cannibal Ferox, are at the same height. So when they're installed, and I have a picture later on of them installed, you can kind of see the horizon line extending from landscape to landscape, or seascape to seascape. And that is kind of referencing that, topologically speaking, we live on a sphere. So we live on a landscape. And it's also like maybe a model for continuity or just infinity, because you can go around a circle constantly. So it's thinking about how maybe more of a colonial view on landscape would be that you could cut it up into pieces. You could abstract the land into chunks and pieces, and how much that seems like American landscape painting, and how I didn't necessarily want to replicate that. So I was finding little tricks to kind of, not tricks, but just like different formal elements to have another conversation, have a conversation on the side that still references land. This piece that I showed you, I kind of did a redo. This one's called Perpetual Genre. I wanted to take away the language of those films by using my own language. So this one has the cannibals, the cannibal figurines, and then these, this is the reference, these land surveying devices. I don't know if there's any surveyors in the room, but they're like lasers, I think, and this helps for very accurate ways of mapping out land for, in order to sell it. And then this cannibal ogress sculpture by a German sculptor. I see some of this stuff as like propaganda against Indigenous people who are often accused of cannibalism, even though a lot of settlers came in with, here's the body of Christ. They didn't maybe notice the irony in that. So, but there's this whole kind of study on how colonization works with like eat our God, we eat God, Indigenous folks eat man, and so it's like ethereal or like of the heavens and of the earth, and that they were elevating Indigenous people. Totally racist, but I thought I'd share. Here's an example of how you can kind of see how the horizon line is intersecting multiple works, the same kind of height from piece to piece, and I think I did nearly 24 works. Here's some more. These ones are in the National Gallery's collection. But you can really see that kind of like black horizon line through these. Now I'm getting to a little bit of the work in the exhibition here. This is a print that was published by High Point Center for Printmaking in Minneapolis. I made this piece while moving from Minneapolis to Chicago. And in that move, I was on I-94 a lot. I was driving my stuff back and forth, trying to move, and I would often stop off and visit the various mounds throughout Wisconsin. There's these beautiful effigy mounds in the shapes of birds and people and otters and lizards and turtles. At the center, inverted, is Man Mound in Baraboo, Wisconsin. The county accidentally severed his legs with a road and then repainted them in white. I'll show you an image in a second. There's also these mica hand forms and talons that are overlaying at the center. They look kind of threatening in this piece. When we were pulling this print at High Point, I wanted some metallic overlay to make them sparkle, to feel like they were cut out sheets of mica. And so we found some ink and we pulled them, and I was like, why if this is metallic paint, why is it inert? Like, why won't it rust or corrode over time? And we looked it up and we found out that the shimmer was actually made from ground up mica. So the very image of the hands is produced with what it's referencing, which is mica. So I was, really happy surprise that could happen, that the very thing it's referencing is made out of the same material. Here's then there's these bent trail marker trees. So I was thinking of like this piece as a sigil for travelers of I-94 that go through mountain country and not realize that so many of their roads dissect burials, graves, and also just really important spiritual places. There's the mica hand forms, and you can see Mound Man at the Man Mound at the center, where they painted in his legs. His head is split open. The Ojibwe teaching, it's the Ho-Chunk take care of the mounds in Wisconsin, but the Ojibwe teaching behind the kind of split head is like the soft spot on a baby or someone who is open to inspiration. That's what that's kind of suggesting, is that this is a very spiritually awakened human being. Sunshine and a Cannibal is a piece that's about the same size as the works in the show. I'm kind of dovetailing ideas of cannibalism and assimilation, cultural assimilation, how Native folks, Indigenous folks are forced to assimilate. I'm seeing that as a metaphor for cannibalism, of like eating and consuming and then making the other part of the body of the dominant. Not real cannibalism, the metaphor. We have Ojibwe people have a kind of a monster in some of our storytelling called the Wendigo, and he is the winter cannibal monster. Kind of his whole deal is that he misidentifies who he consumes. So he would often see other human beings as their clan animal, and that in that misidentification comes that lack of empathy. And without that empathy, then they can do the most heinous thing. So that's part of the teaching of the cannibal that I was bringing into this work. This piece is Indana Kuchibagan, or ancestor and descendant. Our word Indana Kuchibagan in Ojibwe means both ancestor and descendant. So we kind of see how people are related as more spherical, not hierarchical, but that you could be both someone's ancestor and descendant, and that they're the same term because they can go in either direction, if you think of how we're related more as a sphere. This piece has some black ash baskets in it. I will talk more about those later. Different objects for carrying things. There's petroglyphs. There's, it's hard to see, but right there, that's the little cedar spirit tree up in Grand Portage. A lot of our sacred places will be called like Devil's Tower, or this is referred to as the witch tree. Our most sacred places typically will have these really terrible names attached to them. So I could go either way with that. Like maybe that'll keep people away from them, the taboo of it. But it could also make these very sacred places vulnerable by people who take that settler language seriously. So things like the little cedar spirit tree is outside. Our petroglyphs are outside. Whenever there is a fight and the federal government is shut down, all of the national parks are shut down too. And that means a lot of our burial sites and petroglyphs and spiritual places are vulnerable for looting and pillaging and destruction. This piece, though, is kind of like where I'm holding these things. I want to hold them for a while. I want the work itself to be a place where they're cared for, where there's perpetual care baked into the art. Here's a detail. These two pieces are in the show, so you can see them in real life. Unearthed Cannibal and The Indifference of Fire. They both have, they both have references to black ash baskets. The black ash baskets, the trees will probably go away in our lifetime because of the emerald ash borer. The ash borer is killing millions of trees, and we can't plant them fast enough. The black ash baskets were used to make the mounds. The black ash baskets were used to haul earth to make the mounds. So that I'm very sensitive about continuity and to make sure that Indigenous practices don't seem as past tense, but there are mounds being made to this day. There's continuity there. There's also continuity with the very objects and tools we use to make the mounds, which are these baskets. But we're going to have to adapt to other weaving materials because the tree might go extinct. But in my art, I will hold the black ash basket as long as I can, even if it's just in reference through an image or a sigil. This piece also has references to land art. A number of artists, I would say postmodernists, they're Christo and Jean-Claude did these surrounds of islands outside of Miami. The islands themselves were from dredging, were created through dredging, so they're not natural islands, but they've become taken over by birds and plant life. I don't think that the surrounds were very environmentally sound, but I've been starting to reference some land artists as almost maybe a call out, or like, oh, there's a witness to some violence against the earth within the art itself. Here is one of the surrounded islands, this pink fabric. And they were installed in, I think the project was like 1980 to 1983. So those are referenced in the work. There's also a reference to Isle Royal, which to the Ojibwe people, that's, where when we were lowered onto Earth, our origin story, we were lowered to Isle Royal. There's ancient copper mines on the island. There's moose and wolves. What it mostly has is copper, moose, and wolves. But it's in Lake Superior, and it is now a national park. The national park system was created in order to make sure that treaties were not fully enacted. A number of the treaties said if settlers were not using the land, it had to be returned to Native people. So there was a scramble to make the national park system in order to have that qualified as a use, so it wouldn't be returned to Indigenous people. So we love to celebrate the national parks, but even that has a level of violence towards Native people. So Isle Royal was Ojibwe land. It still is. The Grand Portage flag actually flies at their main office there at the national park. But once it becomes a national park, does it ever get land backed? So it's definitely a thing where you wouldn't imagine violence existing, but when it comes to the land, it does. Here's another piece referenced in there. On the left is a Wisconsin, like a panther effigy mound from Wisconsin, and on the right is Michael Heiser's image from City, which was a project that he started in 1970, and he finished in 2022, which is pretty recently. He doesn't talk about the mounds when he talks about City, but you can see it, right? It's there, right? Here are some shapes of the mounds. You can see the images of different falcons and different animals. I don't know. That looks a little bit. We know where he got those images. So I put that in the work as I want to document these things in the same space because I want him to see it. So if you know him, can you tell him about me? This piece is called Perpetual Care. The term perpetual care comes from what is often seen near graves, because then the onus is on the graveyard to take care of the graves and tend the graves. So I kind of liked the idea of perpetual care as like a land term, like whose onus, who is responsible for taking care of not only the land but the stories. This piece is Ink Babble. If you imagine a panorama film, like you have an old camera that has film in it, and you take a shot of a panorama, and you would take the film out, you would look from cell to cell, and you would see each object or element kind of cascade from cell to cell. That would be a time-dominant panorama. That's how you would animate that. And then I wanted to spill in the other direction, make a space-dominant panorama, but like it was still photography that is much more interested in the horizon. So if you think of still photography, you need the distance this way, and if you think of a time-based panorama, you would need each element to kind of candy cane down from cell to cell. So it's a bifurcated panorama, and the idea kind of comes from filmmaking. That's the scale. That's a little dude. And then I did a sister piece. This is kind of like it creates a V, and this one kind of makes anyway. It's red. This one's Red Exit. It's at the Whitney Museum of American Art, and it's kind of the post-pandemic survival piece. So there's a number of objects that refer to our earth divers and our stories, these different catastrophic events that have happened in the past that we've survived. And I also wanted the piece to be about a space Indigenous people make for ourselves. And it was about the time I was founding Center for Native Futures, which the whole idea behind that was we need agency over walls in Chicago. Here's some detail shots. You can kind of see the oil. Now you're familiar with it if you've seen the show. The oil gradations and the gesso and the various materials all together, and ink. The sculpture that's in there now is kind of, this is an install shot, so excuse the people. But I was thinking of the mounds and how there used to be, they know there used to be these columns that were stuck into the mounds because there's holes where they used to exist. And so I wanted to reimagine what the effigy poles would look like. So this is my reimagining something that has been taken away a long time ago. Like, we don't have to just lament the past. We can also have the agency to make new things or reimagine them. The work also goes outside sometimes. It's in the environment. So this is outside the Whitney in New York. And then I did a kind of a large banner project on the Chicago River in Chicago, saying you're on Potawatomi land. Can't get any clearer in both Potawatomi and English. And that's, I think that's part of the idea around how art can function. When it's outside, it has kind of an obligation, and the monuments that have been collapsing, people understand that. That's why those monuments of like the Confederate soldiers were made to intimidate people. And so this work isn't made to intimidate people, but to remind people that where they live. There's a Potawatomi saying that is, that we walk on the bones of our ancestors. We all do. And I think that that's a really important thing to remind yourself when you get up in the morning, that there's deep time in the earth that we occupy. So that was my offering to Chicago. I don't have a slide of it, but Rosalinda and I made the film that's in the one of the rooms. It's about kind of settler placemaking of these wetland mitigation banks that will, buy a ditch off the side of a parking lot, and they'll make a wetland bank, and you can sell it 6 different ways, 20 different ways, and then you can destroy a wetland or something elsewhere, and you can buy these, offsets, these mitigation things, and then re-wet or make a wetland elsewhere. And this is supposed to be, one for one. It's supposed to be environmental. But it's actually, how do you do land back once the land has been turned into a mitigation bank? And it is literally, we went to several of them to make that film, and you can see like an Amazon warehouse, and it's there, they have a big parking lot, and then it all leaches into a big, huge body of water, and the birds are enjoying it, and it looks great, but you might not realize that that is supposed to be an environmental, a place that is supposed to make things better. So we wanted to do this to think about this settler placemaking, about how the earth is to this day abstracted and made into such a commodity and made into such a tradable thing, and how hard it is then to peel off that label of abstraction. So I feel like I talked too long.
Thank you so much, Andrea. And we do have time for some questions from the audience, so I'll be the person handing you the mic. Any questions?
I just want to know how long it takes to do one of the really large pieces.
So the black and white one, Ink Babel, took a little over a year. Sorry, you can see the whole presentation again because I can't find anything. And then the work that's in this show, I like to give myself about 3 months per piece. So it takes a long time, but this one was a little over a year. Same with this piece. So, yeah.
I'll speak up.
Okay.
Tell me about how you find your compositions, because I've seen in a lot of graphics that you go in and together using computers to build your compositions and work to oil or what's your process?
I wish I knew how to use a computer well enough to do that. So, for example, in these pieces, what I did, it's not, some people think there's math or there's got to be some witchcraft to it. What I do is I stack up the paper into one big block, and along the bottom, I'll like measure a fifth of the way in, and I'll make a little tick, like a line down each of the sheets, just on the edge. And then I'll put an object, or I'll paint an object, then I'll drop down to the next one, and I'll just go 1/5 in, 2/5 in, 3/5 in. So it's just a ratio. I'm just building it that way. So it looks precise. It's not terribly precise. It's not mathematical, but it's once you kind of get the hang of it, it's not that complicated.
Andrea, we have a question over here.
In the piece for the Whitney, where you have the being with with the split mind in the upper right-hand corner, and it's carrying someone. Can you speak about that narrative just a little bit in that corner there? Yes, thank you.
So it says one fed all, and that is, so it's the man mound, and he's kind of reclined on the top, and he's getting up, and he's walking away. He's going from this horizontal position, and he's moving like he has agency to leave that spot. Yeah, the yellow is kind of like his intention, his next step. Imagine him going very slow. But yeah, you notice that. I forgot that he's in there too. I love that guy. Really, it's just, there's not a lot of human forms in the effigies. It's much more animal, so this one's really, really special. I've visited him a few times, gave him some tobacco.
Obviously, in the big works, you paint in segments because that's the easiest way to get a big work. Is there any chance that there is some cultural significance to the separation, isolation, and integration, reintegration, either of specific tribal members or tribal communities?
I don't know. I mean, I've thought about, like, and you're like, this is off the wall, and I was like, okay, here's the off the wall answer. I was thinking about how pragmatic my work is. Any one of you could go to an art supply store and buy all of my materials and try to recreate the work. The scale, there's such pragmatism to being able to take something that's 20 feet wide by 10 feet tall, 15 feet tall, and stacking it up, and I can carry it with my body, something that's huge and that can kind of unfurl. There's something maybe parfleche about it, with this kind of like folding up these flat pieces, but it can become larger. It's also human scale at some point, but then it isn't. It can consume you in another. I'm not sure if it's like indigenous so much as it is, it's something that I've been kind of chasing down for myself, and so therefore maybe yes, but it is something that once I kind of started making work like that, I then got other ideas and I needed to kind of chase them down. But yeah, it's definitely something that I think about like the cell is working like a time grid. I don't like the idea of cutting up the land. These horizon lines are all connected. So I think it has like a little bit of the time space. I think the grid is working to kind of unfold the time and space aspect of it.
Here, we have a question here.
Thank you so much for such a great presentation, and with all the color and spirituality and nature and all blended together, and I really appreciate. So I'm just wondering, with your large grand scale, will you use the AI or drone to go to a remote site, and then very hard for us to get there, but you can use those technology or whatever, the tools to make your even greater. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either, because I'm so very terrible at the computer. Even like changing up some colors, like sometimes you can take like a drawing and you can drop in some colors. I'm quite terrible at that. At the same time, I do want to do more video works, and I want to play with more, lighting or light boxes, or work with more sculpture that might have different technologies baked into it. But as it is right now, I'm kind of an analog chick, kind of, very very much so mechanical with the hands, like. But I am curious. I am AI curious. I don't like the environmental aspect of it, though. I think it's they got to figure that out before I'll actually jump into that. But
We have time for about 2 more. Yep.
Thank you. I wanted to say I love how much intention is put into the body of your work, and I was curious how you conduct your research.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like if I have I'm trying to think, do I have a methodology? Because so much of it is, I listen to a lot of books on tape, or not tape, audiobooks while I work. But sometimes a lot of the little sparks that I have to go chase down, the initial spark, will come from like having a glass of wine with Rosalinda or Iris, or hanging out with Hyde Erdrich, one of my really good friends. Sometimes it's this, you get a little seed or a little, like sliver that you have to kind of just pick at and other ideas just kind of accrete onto it. So I think that a lot of the research actually starts through things like conversation, but then I go on like wild internet chases, and I spend a lot of time digging through museum collections, archives, and then there's a lot of like kind of failed sketches and failed ideas that I just kind of let collapse by the wayside. But yeah, I think that a lot of stuff the research starts with conversations. But then, yeah, there's some of the research that I do will also involve like stuff related to the language, and there's things that I'll observe through some of the really old stories, and it's like, I'm going to see if there's any material culture around that already. I'm going to dig into it a little bit more. So there's sometimes where it's just like the thinnest of thread that I'll chase down. Yeah. But I mean, like even all the mound work, driving through Wisconsin, it was literally road trips. And what are these mounds? I'm going to go look at them. So yeah, that's.
All right, I think we have one hand over here, and Andrea is going to be here for a few minutes after if anyone else wants to chat into one-on-one. But
great, so thank you. We're all here to see you. When you go to museums or galleries or studios of other artists, who do you like to see? What kind of art do you like to see out in this world?
That's a good question, because it's it depends on I guess it depends on what, because it's like also like what kind of movies do I like? I like but definitely as far as peers go, I have a lot of artist friends that make work that looks nothing like mine, and it actually doesn't matter. Like we all can vibe and dig each other's work, and we can share a lot of the same observations and ideas, and we're not riffing on each other, we're not copying each other, we're not directly influencing each other in materials, but yeah, it's what I like to see in the world. I really enjoy painting in color, and I mean that's my home base is bright paintings. So that's typically when I go to art shows and stuff. That's what I'm kind of digging for. But yeah, it's diverse what I like, and it's weird stuff that I like. The weirder, the better. Yeah, trippy paintings.
All right, Andrea, again, thank you so much. Please get a round of applause.